May I have your attention, please? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I'm son of Yisrayl Abel, Deacon, Yeshua, and I would like to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It's now time to start finding your seats for Sabbath services.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is son of Yisrayl Abel, Yedidiyah Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It's a privilege and honor to introduce to you the sons and daughters of Yisrayl Abel now entering the sanctuary. I now present one of the sons of Yisrayl Abel, Odahyah Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Today my title is Do Not Gather to do Evil. For my first scripture, please turn to Exodus 23 and verse 2. Actually, you don't have to turn there. It talks about do not follow in the crowd and doing evil. And then could you please turn to Proverbs 1. Verse 10 through 15. And it says, My son, if sinners entice you, do not agree with them. Then if they say, Come and let us lie and wait to shed blood, let us ambush some innocent victims without a cause, with no cost to us. Let us swallow them up alive like the grave, and toll like those that go down into the pit. And skip down to verse 15. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your feet out of their path. Yahweh tells us not to gather for evil to bring harm to any of the righteous in any way. Like coyotes and wolves, people also run in packs to attack the righteous ones. I would like to read a quote from the children's Book of Yisrayl. Second Book of Yisrayl. On page 169, and it says, Yahweh said, You shall not follow a multitude in to do evil. Yahweh knows that it makes me think of a pack of coyotes. This group of people in a faction is like a bunch of coyotes gathering strength and courage from one another. One coyote will not attack a person unless it has rabies. A coyote with a mind, a coyote with a mind must have help gather other coyotes around to help him and to give courage to attack. Wolves also run in packs, just like Pastor told us. I would like to show you a picture of a wolf. Do you remember Wolf 1061, planet or Saturnalia, on December 17th, 2015, on Pope Francis' birthday, and also Roman Saturnalia. Pope Alexander II was a wolf. He on 1061 and realized whenever he became Pope was 1061 and realized that wolf on his badge. I looked up 1061 in Strong's Hebrew, and it means fruits. And why? And then look at Matthew 7:15 on page 733. And it says, "Beware of false prophets that come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravaging wolves. You will know that." In verse 16 it says, "You will know them by their fruits." By their fruits. Yahshua said that you will know them by their fruits. You will know the coyotes and wolves by their fruits. They bring forth murder, stealing, lies, which those are all forms of breaking Yahweh's 613 laws. Pastor said when Scripture relates to people as ravaging wolves, coyotes, sheep, lambs, that they are all talking about their character. The house of Yahweh, the righteous tree, cannot bring forth negative character. They can only bring forth fruits of peaceful, fruits of righteousness. So let's continue to gather together at the house of Yahweh on Sabbath to learn how to practice the peaceful solution. And with that, if you all please stand.
And now it's my honor and privilege to turn the services over to son of Yisrayl Abel, Deacon White Buffalo.
Shabbat Shalom. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Today I'm going to continue speaking about Yahweh's laws of hunting and butchering. And my title is, The Pope Does Not Have Authority from Heaven to Change Yahweh's Health Laws. As we see today, the Pope is attempting to change all of Yahweh's laws. But today I'm going to speak specifically about Yahweh's health laws. The Pope is promoting the eating of unclean foods so much that he even tried to change a species from a mammal to a fish. They claim that their God Jesus cleansed the pig, and they're so confused that they twist the Holy Scriptures to debate this theory. And this is the scriptures that they use. In the book of Acts, on page 850, Acts 10, page 850, Acts 10 and verse 9 to 16. As you can see there, right above that verse 9, it says, Kepha's vision of unclean things. Cornelius's men come near Jaffa. It says, the next day, as they went on their journey and drew near the city, Kepha went up onto the housetop to pray about the 6th hour, around 12 o'clock noon. Now he became very hungry. Notice that he became very hungry and wanted something to eat. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance, and envisioned heaven being open, and something like a great sheet lowered by the 4 corners descending to the earth. And within it were all kinds of 4-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. And there came a voice to him, Rise, Kepha, kill and eat. But Kepha said, By no means, ruler, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. And the voice came to him again a second time. What Yahweh has cleansed, you must not call common. This was done 3 times, then the sheet was taken up to heaven again. This is the scripture that they tried to twist to justify their sins. If you look at side note G1 for verse 15, side note G1, it says, in symbolically taking away the difference between the clean and unclean beast, he shows that there is no difference between the Yadaim and the Gentiles who fully keep, love, and uphold the laws of Yahweh. So if you notice, this is talking about people. This is not saying that Yahweh or Yahshua Messiah have abolished the clean and unclean laws. As the Apostle Kepha himself explained, the vision he saw was to show him that any man, regardless of race, nationality, or bloodline, who reverences Yahweh will be accepted by him. There is no open declaration by Kepha or anyone else involved with this vision that the clean and unclean laws of Yahweh have now been abolished, and that such unclean animals as the pig, armadillo, catfish, etc. are now acceptable to eat in Yahweh's eyes, okay? There's no such thing as that. Yahweh's laws still stand, okay? And this is talking about people. If you notice, it's saying that any person that reverences Yahweh and keeps his laws, whether he's a Yadaim or a Gentile, there's no difference between them. The vision had food in it, unclean and clean animals, because if you notice, Yahweh put food in this dream to get this dream through to Kepha, because in verse 10 it says that he was hungry. In fact, in Matithia, on page 731, Matithia 5, Matithia 5 and verse 17 to 20. It says, Do not even think that I have come to destroy the law of the prophets. I have not come to destroy them, but to establish them. For truly I say to you, unless heaven and earth passes away, One yod, the smallest of the letters, will in no way pass from the law until all these things are perfected. Whosoever therefore will break one of the least of these laws and will teach men so, he will be called the least in the kingdom of Yahweh. But whoever will do and teach them, the same will be called great in the kingdom of Yahweh. For I say to you, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will certainly not enter into the kingdom of Yahweh. Yahshua never changed the laws. In fact, Jesus may have attempted to cleanse the pig, but he failed because the pig is still not cleansed. Yahshua never cleansed the pig. Yahweh created pigs for a reason, and that reason was to clean up the earth. Okay? In one of Pastor's sermons, I got this from the Yisrael Hawkins, says, he says, you know, in Purcell, when I was a child, Purcell, Oklahoma, there was a man named Judy Sparlin. I don't know why I remember his name, but that was his name, Jody Sparlin. He had a pig pen right in the middle of Purcell, Oklahoma. Now it was there, and Purcell was built kind of built around it. It kind of stunk up the whole town when the wind was out of the south. You know, you'd get its drift as it came across Purcell. And I had a buddy of mine who lived close to this pig farm. But I saw how they would drag these dead animals. The guy had a winch truck, and he'd go out and pick up the dead animals that died on the farms and ranches. He'd bring them back, horses, everything. He brought everything there, everything. He just dumped it out in the pig pen. He had about a 10-acre patch there, and he'd just lay them in the pig pen, and the pigs would go to work on them and, eat them. Well, now it makes me think of that when I read this article. Also, as we know, the holidays invite the eating of unclean animals. I have an article from the Wall Street Journal. It's entitled, Some Additions to the Menu. This was written in 2006, this article, but it's still done today. It says, the season of Lent, which began on Wednesday, brings to mind an odd request the Vatican received from South America in the 17th century. The faithful sought permission to eat capybaras on Fridays during the 6 weeks before Easter, when Catholics are supposed to avoid the meats of birds and mammals. The priests who puzzled over this petition certainly had no inkling of capybaras. Even today, most non-zookeepers outside South America have never heard of them. But these critters spend lots of time in water, they swim and dive well, and their feet are slightly webbed, kind of like fish, right? Close enough for the Vatican, apparently, because Rome sent out the word that it was acceptable to consume capybaras during Lent. Today they're considered a delicacy in many parts of South America, especially Venezuela. Eating capybaras there during Lent is about as traditional as eating turkeys at Thanksgiving here in the United States. Technically, though, capybaras are mammals, the largest members of the rodent family, with adults weighing more than 100 pounds. The food they provide is meat. Okay? And here's a capybara. If you notice, there's some swimming in the water, right? So that makes them a fish. They go and hunt these swamp rats that they call fish. Okay, so capybaras are hardly the only creatures that have been subjected to cafeteria-style Catholicism. At various times and places, Lenten exceptions have reportedly been made for beavers, geese, puffins, and other marine animals. So these are fish as well. There's a persistent rumor in Michigan, for example, that muskrats are an approved dish. When a bishop was asked about it, he supposedly replied that anybody bold enough to eat muskrat is doing penance worthy of the greatest saints. So because they can eat these unclean animals, they can boldly eat these rats. They're supposed to be saints. This is still going on today. Skipping down a little, it says, there was a time when even the consumption of fish was frowned upon, though by the 10th century it was a well-established option. In his just published book, Fish on Friday, the respected anthropologist Brian Fagan argues that fishermen who toiled to feed this European hunger probably laid eyes on Newfoundland before Columbus sailed across the ocean. It was fish, not spices, that led to the discovery of North America. So also, it says if the Vatican cooperates, it can expect an arkload of follow-up requests. Next on the list is probably the green iguana. Another threatened reptile that's on a Latin American soup recipe. If a ban ever materializes, Catholics will need to summon headlines that proclaim a papal crackdown on Easter iguana hunts. Okay, and it says, for those who worry about their restrictions on their reptile intake, here's a modest proposal: capybara stew. So they eat these rats, and they claim that when they do this, they become saints, okay? These holidays invite the eating of the breaking of Yahweh's laws. In conclusion, yearly, Pastor gives us the clean and acceptable booklets so we can differentiate between the clean and the unclean. We need to watch ourselves, like Yisrayl Hawkins says, so we don't fall into this trap and break the laws of Yahweh. With that, I would like to turn it over, if you all please stand. I'd like to turn it over to the Great Kohan Benyamin Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. You may be seated. The title of my sermon today is called Together 2016. We're going to be talking about the two gatherings that are taking place in this world today. And I'm going to get right into it because I have a time constraint here. But if you'll open up to Revelation 16:16, it'll be talking about one of the gatherings that we'll be talking about. Revelation 16:16, where it reads, better read it from here so you don't, I'll read it from the Book of Yahweh and I'll give you a page number too. 16:16, that's interesting, right? Just like 2016. It says, and actually let me read verse 14. And we'll start at 13. It says, I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. For they are the spirits of demons who perform signs. Remember that word demons there is word number 1142? Remember the 1142 super confessors? They're the spirits of demons who perform signs, remember lying signs, who go forth to the kings of the whole inhabited earth to gather them to the battle of the great day of Yahweh Almighty. And notice in 16, and he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew language Har-Megiddo, or Armageddon. Now turn over to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, found on page 931. In verse 2:1 it says, Now we plead with you, brothers. This is speaking to the house of Yahweh, concerning the coming of our King, Yahshua Messiah, and our gathering together to him. So now there's 2 gatherings taking place. One in Abelin, the gathering place, as the booklet shows in What Yahweh's Feasts Mean to You, and also the Mark of the Beast, volume 1 and 2. I'm going to be reading an excerpt here from the Mark of the Beast, volume 2. By the way, I encourage you, as the Great Kohan Yedidiyah has encouraged us for years, to get these books. Get these Mark of the Beast books, because it's like reading today's news 40 years ago when he wrote it in 1976. Pastor says on page 232, he says, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophets who do this gathering, they do it by deceiving miracles. Deceiving miracles. And then on 233 it says, who will be gathered? He says the word gathered in Revelation 16:16 is 4863, and it means to bring together, to join in one, or in unity, so to speak. These leaders are gathering together in one accord for one purpose. And I'm going to go over to page 235. Those who are gathered are the armies of the 10 religious powers Satan will have under his authority under this beast. And he shows about the 10 horns. Page 236. It says the Catholic Church has a leader. It has diplomatic relations with most of the world's foreign governments. The Catholic Church involves itself in foreign affairs. The Catholic Church is a government within itself. Remember, church and state. The Vatican is a sovereign nation. And it's also a religious power. That's why they have a seat in the Vatican. I mean, and not in the Vatican, but in the UN, whom they work together with. The Catholic Church is the only religion that can boast of having a kingdom. Okay, it says, the Bible says one day in the future, 10 religious powers who are of the beast and against the worship of Yahweh will be given one mind. He underlines that, one mind, to give their power and strength to gather together in the Megiddo Valley. And he goes on to explain that. You need to get the Mark of the Beast, Volume 2, and read this so you can understand what these things mean. It's not like they're going to all gather in one little space there and have this big war. That's not what it's talking about. This is symbolic. It says they will gather together in order to march to Jerusalem. They will be coming together against the only people on this earth alive who still have the promises from Yahweh. Turn over to Revelation 17. Revelation 17, and it's on page 982. Revelation 17, verse 13. These 10 horns in verse 12, he says in verse 13, these have one purpose. And it says one mind in the King James Version, and they give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb. Well, you know, this isn't going to be some Star Wars thing, you know, where they're making war in heaven. This is going to be against the house of Yahweh, the Lamb. Remember, we have the Lamb, the high priest, over the house of Yahweh. We're the only ones that have a high priest, a righteous high priest in these last days. So now, we talked about the two gatherings. Now, Pope Francis is a very busy man, okay? He's doing a lot of gathering. It says Francis is proving to be a very ecumenical pope. Now that word, in case you're not sure, it just means he's really great at gathering people together. Okay? And I'm going to show you the meaning of it. That word ecumenical, or ecumenical, it says, of worldwide scope or applicability, universal. Concerned with establishing or promoting unity among churches or religions. Okay, that's what he's concerned with, is getting the people together. Remember Vatican II in 1962 to 1965? The biggest thing they talked about in Vatican II, and among other things, was relations to ecumenism among other religions. In other words, let's get our daughters back and let's get everybody under the umbrella of the Catholic Church. Now recently, on July 16th through the, actually they started gathering at that time, there was a gathering of Orthodox Catholic priests. Okay, now, remember the Great Schism of 1054 and how the Eastern Church and the Western Church split up. They've been split ever since on certain doctrinal issues and so on and so forth. But it says here, Pope, on June 16th through the 26th, they gathered together in the island of Crete in Greece to have what they call a pan-Orthodox, pan meaning all of them, pan-Orthodox council of these patriarchs. Well, guess how many showed up? And guess how many they say came into unity also? Remember, they have one mind? Here's the Pan-Orthodox Council in Crete declares Orthodox Church unity. And if you'll notice, if you count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And also notice here their flag of the Holy Roman Empire that they're standing on at the meeting, at their gathering. Pope offers prayers as Pan-Orthodox Council opens in Crete. Now it opened, they gathered on the 16th, but it didn't start till the 19th. They just did some preliminary things. They celebrated their Pentecost, their Orthodox Pentecost, on the 19th of June. It says the council opened on June 19th in the presence of the emperor of the island of Crete, and there was 10 of these individuals. Now, guess what took place? 4 of them pulled out at the last minute. Amongst them was the Russian Orthodox Church, who claims the most members. I think they have about 150 million Orthodox Russian members of the Orthodox Church in Russia. They were one of the ones that pulled out. There was 14 that were supposed to be there, and only 10 showed up. Imagine that. Notice what they said here. The news said, with or without Russia, this Orthodox Council is going to be binding. It's going to be binding. Now, that's an interesting choice of words, because I told you they gathered on 6/16, and it means prisoners, and it's from this Hebrew word here, and it means bound. Bound, and it also means bind. Binds, tied. Now, who arranged this thing? You know, this meeting was 55 years in the works. They started it in 1961. And here's the main guy behind it. He's one of the 10. He's one of these 10 patriarchs. His name is Bartholomew I of Constantinople. That should ring a bell, because Constantinople is modern-day Istanbul in Turkey, where they just had a bombing just a few days after this took place. Y'all remember that? At the airport? Now, Bartholomew, he's known as, he's the 270th and current Archbishop of Constantinople and the Ecumenical Patriarch. Okay? He is what's considered, his title is first among equals, because all the patriarchs consider themselves to be equal, but he's the first among equals. Okay? I guess that means he's over all the equals, right? Pretty confusing. Let's look at some of Bartholomew's accomplishments, because we want to learn a little bit about the guy. It says he gained a reputation as a prominent environmentalist. Hey, he has a little something in common with somebody we know, doesn't he? The Green Pope, Pope Francis, putting the support of the Patriarchate behind various international environmental issues or causes. This has earned him the nickname of the Green Patriarch and the Green Pope. Hey! Notice what else. And there's a lot on this gentleman here. He attended the papal inauguration of Pope Francis on March 19, 2013, paving the way for better Catholic-Orthodox relations. It was the first time that the spiritual head of the Eastern Orthodox, remember the East and the West split, Constantinople was named after Constantine, the Pope. He's the one that actually established that city. And it was called the Second Rome back then. It was considered the Second Rome. And they split over certain issues in 1054, and they've been split ever since. So he attended. It was the first time that an Eastern Pope or an Eastern Orthodox leader had attended inauguration. But notice also, they got together on the island of Lesbos. The island of Lesbos. Remember when they went to the island of the lesbians to talk about immigration on April 16th? They all met there, and the Pope said, I'll take 12 of them back to the Vatican. Well, of course he did. And doesn't it just make sense? Okay, so they attended the world refugee issue there on the island of Lesbos together. But let me back up too just a minute. I want to give you an idea where this pope, this green pope, as they call him, resides. This is a map here of the area, Asia Minor, or Central Asia, I think they call it. Okay, and you notice what's all around here. These are all the real hot spots today. You know, you've got Bulgaria, Romania, the Ukraine, which is a real big hot spot right now, right, with the war that they're trying to get their feet into to encircle Russia. You got Poland right up here. You've got Georgia, Armenia, Iran, Syria, and right here is where Istanbul or Constantinople is, okay? Just so you get kind of an idea. By the way, that encyclical, remember Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment? I believe. Oh, by the way, let me show you this too. Bartholomew is here at the Vatican with Shimon Peres and Mahmoud Abbas and Pope Francis praying for peace on May 25th, 2014. Do you all remember that? Okay, he was there amongst them right there. Okay? And remember, he's an environmental pope. The name of that encyclical was Laudato Si, and its gematria is 612. 612. Don't forget that, because that number is going to be a very key to unlocking what's taking place here, what Yahweh is going to be showing us. Now, it said that he was the 270th patriarch of the Eastern Orthodox. So I had to look that up. Because remember, Yahweh reveals secrets, right? And he's doing it through these numbers, and he's doing it through these news stories and these pictures. Because guess what? You know, we have a Gregorian calendar. It's called a Gregorian calendar. And Yahshua told you to watch. Did you know that the word Gregory means watchful? And it means alert? You need to watch. You need to watch these news stories that they're showing in the news, because these events are being told on through these numbers and what's taking place. 270 means to take hold, to take possession, to seize. It means to take back into possession. Right here. Take back. Take possession. That's in the Hebrew. In the Greek, it means to reap or collect. Reap or to collect. And it means, it's from this word, which means together. Together. To gather together. To gather together. Do you think this is a coincidence? Now raise your hand if you think this is a coincidence. Well, of course it's a coincidence. It's a coincident. Oh, and it's from 260. It means together with, or together. Keep that word in mind, together, okay? Let me make sure I'm not losing my place. Okay. Speaking of together, let me show you another something. The United Nations, you know, the entity that works with the Pope. Here's the international years that they declared. Do you remember last year they had their 2015 was called the International Year of Light? Remember the year of Lucifer? They called it light-based technologies, but Yahweh reveals secrets, and he showed that this Luciferian organization called the Vatican, or called the UN. Yes, you can say Vatican. They're both interchangeable because they're both working together. 2015 was declared to be the year of light. Well, this year is the year of pulses. 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 Pulse. Let's talk about that. Pulses. I think there was a recent shooting on June 12th at a nightclub, and it was called, what was it? Well, here, let me show you another. Here's their official logo here with their black spoon and their 13 beans. The International Year of Pulses. I won't get into that today, but I'll just show you their logo. Here's their hashtag that they put out there, because they want you to learn about some other things you need to know along the way, which we'll talk about. Here's the name of the nightclub in Orlando. Pulse. There's the FBI recently put out a report, or somebody put out a report saying that nobody was killed until 5:13 in the morning at the Pulse nightclub. They showed the timeline, and it said nobody actually got killed until these police went in there, or the FBI, or whoever it was that stormed the place. And allegedly, this Pulse shooter, Omar, who killed 50 on the 50th Omar, remember that? Omar, Pulse shooter, did it for revenge. Alleges his ex-lover, who was a gay. See, first you were told he was a man who saw two men kissing, so he went in there and killed some homosexuals. But then they found out he was one too. And they changed the whole narrative. So now everyone's all confused. Well, that's exactly what they want. They want you to be confused. Remember, they're using lying signs and wonders. Now, here's something interesting, because once Yahweh revealed that, then it led to something else. Let me see if I can find where I'm at. Okay, here it is. Okay. Next month, on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., they're having a gathering. And it's on 7/16/16. Anybody, does that ring a bell to anybody? 7/16? July 16th? War in heaven? War on heaven, Jupiter. Y'all remember that? And it's going to be on 7/16/16, which is really code for 777. By the way, in July, this month's going to be a hot month, okay? This month, you have two 777s, because you're going to have 7/16/16, and you're going to have 7/7/16. So you're going to have two 777s. But they're going to have this gathering, this group. This group, it's called Together 2016, and it says, moments of historic change are often marked by historic gatherings. It says, Together 2016 is the day our generation will meet on the National Mall to come together around Jesus in unified prayer, worship, and a call for catalytic change. Whatever that means. We're coming together with as many people as possible who believe Jesus changes everything. Here's the name of the group that put it together. They're called the Pulse Movement. Pulse Movement. Now, they're located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And of course, they're right off 66 there. Right? And I looked at their phone number. That was rather interesting, because the area code is 612. And you all know 612 was Pentecost, right? When the shooting took place in Orlando, right? But I looked up the first three numbers also there, 248. And it means this. It means to thresh wheat. Means to thresh wheat, to thresh. This is in the Greek. It means to tread out the grain. Thresh, tread out the corn. And it says, see Greek, halon. Well, so I did. And it means a threshing floor. Do y'all remember on 612 us talking about that threshing floor? Do you remember that coming up? Pastor talked about it on 611. He talked about Rhea and Boaz and the threshing floor. And then the next day there were some numbers that came up that pointed to the threshing floor again. Well, here we are again. This threshing floor. And it means as chaff, as just threshed. And it sees C Greek heliso. And lo and behold, it means together. 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 Together 2016, right? Coincidence? The last four numbers on their telephone number is 8080. So I had to look that up. And it means to grow fat or insensitive. Fat. Like Yeketske 34:16. says. Unreceptive. It's used of the wicked as meaning that they are unreceptive. Unreceptive to the message. Now, I got to show you these pictures of these gatherings. By the way, here's the guy that put it together, Nick Hall. And look who he's with. Nick Hall. Like his haircut? I hope you don't. Look who he's with, giving his book, which is called Reset 2016. Reset 2016. Hey, by the way, did you hear who's coming to Washington, D.C. to buy a satellite to speak at the Together gathering? Pope Francis. Pope Francis is going to be there live by a satellite. And they're expecting over 1 million people to gather on 7/16/16. I wonder what's in store. Well, that's going to be on a Sabbath, so we'll be safe here, right? Now, on 6/26, a few days ago, Pope Francis said, you need to apologize to gays and other marginalized groups. I guess like us, right? I guess except us. So I've made up my mind that next time I see a homosexual, I'm going to apologize to him and tell him, I'm sorry your leader lied to you, but what you're doing is not very beneficial, but we can help you. And here's, I wouldn't expect anything less from this guy, this Jorge Mario Bergoglio, whose gematria in Jewish gematria is 1142. I wouldn't expect anything less but this demons, this gathering of these gathering taking place, these demons gathering. Now, remember, June 26, when he made that statement, was the day that same-sex marriage was legalized here in America by the Supreme Court. By the way, it was also the day that the United Nations, remember these things have been brought out, the United Nations signed their charter on June 26, 1945. So there you have the Supreme Court, the UN, the Vatican, oh here we go, the Church of the Gisu. Remember the Church of the Gisu? They were the Church of the Jesuits. Remember, it was right here. Construction of the church began on June 26, 1568. Does this kind of give you an idea who's gathering against the House of Yahweh here? Well, 626 in the Hebrew. Well, what else would it mean? It means together. Because you know what? The Vatican, the UN, these patriarchs, remember their meeting ended on June 26th. And that's when they made their declaration of unity. That was on June 26th. Yahweh showing, and also means, doesn't just mean together, it means gathering. Gathering. That's 626. It means a collection of people together. And it means gathered. It's from 622. Okay, now, let's see, 650. Okay, I got to show this. On 626, at about 6:29 in the morning or so, there was a double rainbow out in the parking lot. Were you up early looking at it? The same day that this gathering ended and the Pope made his comments and everything, there was a double rainbow. And as I watched, this creature came to attack the rainbow, as you can see. You see that? Remember this gathering to attack the house of Yahweh. Notice this here. This picture of the dragon was taken at 6:50 because that rainbow was out there for about 30 minutes. And a pastor was out there standing in the parking lot as well observing it. So he knows it was there. It means, 650 means keep away from someone by defrauding, to cheat, taking away what rightfully belongs to someone else. You know, like our rainbow they use, that they stole from us. Okay? Also, it means streams, strong torrents, like water. Remember the propaganda, the lies and propaganda that come against the house of Yahweh? And it ended at 651, which means gloom. Read Zephaniah 1:14 through 18 about the gloom that's fixing to take place in the great day of Yahweh that they're gathering for, this battle. Okay, this great battle. Now, while they're attacking the rainbow, by the way, I have to get this on the record. That was the time that dragon appeared at 6:50. There it is again. Now, the other day on the 29th, on 6/29, looking out on the south end, there was this figure here. You can't see it very well, so I had to darken it. But what it is, it's a man walking through the water, making his way to the house of Yahweh. Think of Isaiah 43, how he's going to bring us through the waters. Think of 45, where it says they're going to come over to you. Okay, they're going to come over to you. He's walking through the water. You can see the water here. Now, when you flip the picture exactly upside down, here's what you have. You have a dragon coming up out of the water. And you have the sand on the seashore. You see that? You see that sand? And you see the dragon coming up out of the water with some kind of crown on his head. That's in that picture. You just flip it over exactly, and that's what you get. 629, by the way, means redemption. It means salvation. Redemption, salvation. Okay, remember there's a gathering taking place in Abelin for salvation. But there's also a gathering into Armageddon for destruction. Okay? And I would greatly encourage everyone out there, this is the place you need to be gathering. Okay? And you need to gather, first you need to gather your thoughts together. Okay? And you need to look at this sensibly, and you need to look at the evidence that Yahweh is presenting about these gatherings that are taking place. Okay? Because it's so clear that I believe even a young child, the youngest child in the house of Yahweh can understand this if they just put their mind to it. Get into these books, get into the Mark of the Beast, get into these newsletters, get into these Israel Says, get into Yahweh'sBranch.com. Get into these things, because Yahweh will help you to understand these things. By the way, June 29th, the time of the picture, for my last part here, it just says 629 at 4:59 is when that picture was taken. We should all know what 4:59 means. It means anomos, lawless, iniquity, to push aside the law. Remember from 4:58? It's the same day that the Vatican said no Yahweh in songs at prayers at Catholic masses. Here's the proof right here. Instruction came in a June 29th letter. Now what greater form of pushing aside and doing away with the laws of Yahweh can you get there, right? And look at this guy, just appointed head of the U.S. Religious Freedom Commission, the Jesuit. It looks like July is going to be a hot month, right? Well, I encourage you all to be together here, okay? Be together here at the house of Yahweh. And with that, I would like to turn it over now. May Yahweh bless you. I'd like to turn it over to the Great Kohan Yedidiyah Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may all be seated. Of course, in today's news, the quartet, everyone remembers the quartet, made up of the EU, Russia, the UN, and the United States. They just released a proposal for peace to Israel, and it was immediately rejected by Benjamin Netanyahu. So watch, because there's a tit for tat taking place here, and there's this stretch for power. Also, remember the United States went into Iraq back in 2003 to save the Iraqis from their brutal dictator, as it was stated. In 2016, the most deadliest country in the world for a child to live is Iraq. So if we can judge our success by the standards which we set, we know that war is a failure once again. And then remember how the love of this world has grown cold. This last week, a mother shoots her 2 children, her 2 daughters, to get back at her husband. And then the police, of course, they shoot her. So all 3 of them die. Then something pastors been bringing for years, doctors are being paid by drug companies. In fact, doctors have a little over $1 billion invested in drug companies. It's a great way to retire. But it shows how much money is paid out to doctors. And if anyone's ever run a business, you know you need your bread and butter, as they call it, to pay your bills. Well, that's the bread and butter for doctors. It pays their bills. And then the United States says it will not stop with the justified strikes, these drone strikes, which are, they say, justified. And then, of course, this week they announced transgenders can join the military also openly. Not that they'd refused them to begin with, but now they can join openly. Then Moscow, they slammed the EU because they just put 6 more months of sanctions on them. And remember, you need money to build your military. If we put sanctions on you, we can hold you down. We can control you. And then Turkey this week had what they call a terrorist attack in their airport. Well, watch how Russia has been trying to get countries to send this man back to Russia since 2003, and everyone refused to do so. And then abortions. This is, watch the plain, and I don't know a kinder way to say it than plain stupidity in what's being said here. They release a new study showing how safe abortions are. The odds of you dying are so slim. In fact, they're 14 times greater if you give birth. You have to miss the whole concept that someone is being murdered in every abortion to come to this conclusion. And confusion has to be at the highest point. But watch, because this is what this world has gone into. This is the confusion it's gone into. And of course, more with war, the EU now is planning on building its own military, going around NATO. Now, NATO doesn't like this. One thing you need to keep in mind, that all NATO members are supposed to pay 2% of their defense budget to NATO. But not everybody's paying their percentage. They're not keeping their dues up with the club they're in. And NATO doesn't like that. Then violence in Israel. Keep this in mind, because we see a young man. He supposedly attacks a soldier with a knife, and he's running, and they shoot him 70 plus times with M16s. After he hits the ground, they continue to shoot him. And then the police chief says, we're only doing what they've done, what we taught them to do. And we look at Israel and we look at Palestine, but watch the video of the man who's high on meth in Minnesota, and watch how he's treated. He obviously is completely out of his mind. And then watch how many times they shoot him. Watch how they deal with him. And then watch, after he's dropped on the ground, how many more times they shoot him. Now, this is American citizens shooting American citizens. It's not Israeli and Palestinians, as we try to blame, but it's all about people doing what they've been taught to do. They've been trained to do it. Then Russia warns Finland. While Vladimir Putin was in Finland, he warned them, do not join NATO. We will put soldiers back on the border if you do. They pulled them back, and they're saying they will put them back on there. And then we end, of course, with this unity meeting of these religious leaders who 10 of 14 is not unity. That seems like 4 people are missing. They're in disagreement. And watch, they say they're in disagreement. Watch how they work it, but this is more to come. They say this is the first time in 1,000 years this meeting has taken place. But listen very carefully to what they're saying. They're grasping. They're falling apart. Babylon is falling, and they're grasping for power. At this time, if we could please play the news.
Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrael Hawkins. Well, in the news today, deadly suicide attacks at one of Turkey's airports, Israeli-Palestinian violence erupting, and transgenders now allowed in the military. Well, all these stories and more, but first, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is rejecting the idea that settlements prevent peace. Recently, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected an appeal by the Middle East Quartet to stop settlement construction. Netanyahu denied the claim that settlements were a barrier to moving forward with the two-state peace process.
Well, the quartet issued a report which accuses Israel of preventing Palestinians from growth and development by 1, confiscating their land, and 2, demolishing their homes. The report also stated 570,000 Israelis are currently living in the settlements across the West Bank. However, these settlements are illegal under the international law. Well, the Middle East Quartet is made up of the European Union, Russia, the U.S., and the United Nations, and is trying to revive the peace talks that broke down in April of 2014.
But Palestinians are not the only people experiencing severe difficulties in their homeland. The United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, or UNICEF, is sounding the alarm for children's rights in Iraq. They are now reporting how war in that country has had a catastrophic impact on Iraqi children.
That's right. Just what are these children facing? Well, UNICEF says 3.6 million Iraqi children are at serious risk of death, injury, sexual violence, abduction, and recruitment by armed groups. And over the past 18 months, there was an increase of 1.3 million children falling into this category.
That isn't where it ends, however. UNICEF says the number of Iraqi children in need of humanitarian assistance is at 4.7 million. The international organization describes Iraq as one of the world's most dangerous places for children to live. They appeal to all warring parties to protect children's rights in that country.
Really, human rights altogether would be the goal. Well, in Texas, a family meeting with a frightening outcome. A mother called her husband and 2 daughters together in their family living room, not to work out any problems they had, but to shoot her own daughters right in front of their father. After being shot, 22-year-old Taylor and 17-year-old Madison ran out of the house, collapsing in the street.
Wow. A neighbor got on the phone with a 911 dispatcher and watched in horror, describing how the mother continued to shoot one of her daughters in the back. Now, the shooting took place in the Texas town of Fulshear, which is in Fort Bend County. As Fulshear police arrived on the scene, they could not get Christy Sheets to put down her gun and in turn shot and killed the mother.
Well, Madison Sheets was taken by life flight to a nearby hospital, but later died there. The distraught father, Jason Sheets, was escorted away by paramedics for counseling. He was not injured in the shooting, but believes his wife wanted him to live with the pain of losing both his daughters in this violent manner because he wanted a divorce from her.
Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office is leading the investigation. Neighbors were in disbelief that something like this could take place in such a normal family in their own quiet town.
This goes to show you that there is no place that is safe when people make poor choices. Well, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services released data showing U.S. doctors received about $6.5 billion in payments from different drug and medical device companies in 2015 alone. It was reported that doctors owned about $1 billion in industry stock for the year as well.
The payments cover things like meals, travel, and research grants for individual doctors and also for teaching hospitals. This information was made public due to a provision in the Open Payment Act. Its goal is to, quote, to prevent inappropriate influence on research, education, and clinical decision making, end quote, and also to encourage transparency about financial ties.
Interesting. Well, the American Medical Association calls this transparency vital and issued this statement saying, quote, the AMA strongly opposes inappropriate, unethical interactions between physicians and the industry. However, not all interactions are unethical or inappropriate, end quote.
The data in this report includes payment information for more than 600,000 individual U.S. doctors as well as over 1,100 teaching hospitals across the country. The total payments are a bit higher than in the previous year. The Washington Post reported the doctors to profit most were neurologists and orthopedic surgeons.
Interesting. Well, White House Press Secretary John Ernst told reporters in a briefing there is no justifiable excuse for carrying out an airstrike on innocent civilians who have already once fled their homes to escape violence. The airstrike, which killed 28 and left dozens more injured, came during a ceasefire negotiated by the United States and Russia.
While the White House calls these airstrikes unacceptable, U.S. military officials told the press that despite the controversy surrounding these signature strikes, they will continue as needed. Now, signature strikes are the U.S. military's assumption that if a group's action mirror those of a terrorist cell, then it can be concluded by their signature that they are terrorists. Well, this then gives them the right to use the drones to attack the individual or the group. So they're saying if they have the actions like the terrorists, they must be terrorists. Therefore, it gives us right to attack.
Interesting, very interesting. Well, human rights groups protest drone attacks because the U.S. cannot always guarantee civilian safety. And in some cases, they cannot tell whether or not a civilian has been injured or killed. An anonymous senior staff member reportedly said, "We continue to reserve the rights to take action not just against individual terrorist targets, but when we believe we have, for instance, a force protection issue or information to suggest a continued imminent threat."
Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter announced on June 30th that transgender people will no longer be banned from serving in the military. Secretary Carter said, effective immediately, transgender Americans may serve openly. They can no longer be discharged or otherwise separated from the military just for being transgender.
In July of 2015, the Defense Secretary had announced a rethink of the policy in a statement to the press. This came just after Patricia King openly admitted to being transgender. Serving for 16 years in the U.S. military as a man, she was now the first openly transgender infantryman in the U.S. Army.
Elated by the announcement, King told NBC News that, "I've been fighting for this and waiting for this for so long that it was much more emotional than I anticipated. I had to take a moment to let those feelings sink in."
Well, in other news, Russia is still involved in a tussle with the EU. Back and forth there. Larry McGee has been following that story for us as well as several others. Larry, what do we have for this broadcast?
Extended sanctions against Russia. The EU has decided to lengthen sanctions against Moscow for an additional 6 months, a move which Russia says is absurd and a continuation of Brussels' short-sighted policy. The Orthodox nation has stated that the EU's moves will not force it to change course. The sanctions have been leveled against Russia's oil industry as well as its finance and defense sectors. The European Union contends that the actions were necessary to force Russia to completely implement the Minsk agreement concerning the Ukraine. The measures were first imposed by the EU and the US in 2014. Following what Western nations call support for pro-Russian forces in Ukraine. Alleged support for the insurgents who carried out the recent bombings at an international airport in Istanbul was the reason 24 people were recently arrested and detained by Turkish officials during raids carried out at 16 locations throughout that country. The bombers are being identified with the mercenaries of ISIS, and the alleged mastermind behind it all is reported to have been Ahmet Chatayev, a man whom Russian intelligence fingered as being the main recruiter of ISIS fighters into Russia and Europe. Known to some as Ahmet One Arm after having lost one of his arms during the Chechen War, he was on Russia's wanted list since 2003. Moscow reportedly attempted to alert America to the danger Ahmet posed, but he was nonetheless reportedly accepted into the West with open arms. It wasn't until 2015 that the U.S. and EU added Chatayev to its terrorist watch list. Up until then, Moscow's warnings were completely ignored. Sadly, ignoring the facts is more common these days than it is rare. Proponents of abortion were on the warpath this week, posing the question of whether or not the process of terminating the life of a fetus is risky for the mother. As the old saying goes, there are stats for every story, and never is that more evident than in the numbers being utilized by certain journalists in an effort to build a case for abortion. According to one study cited, there is actually 14 times more risk associated with giving birth to a child than in taking its life, with further stats suggesting the risk of death is only 0.0007% to the mother. The statistical speciousness abounds even further yet still for those who are interested, much to the delight of Malthusians in abortion clinics, since another stat is that half of women in the U.S. will at some point terminate a pregnancy. Apparently, the world's unborn aren't the only ones in need of defense. The EU is proposing to establish an army independent of NATO. Shared Vision, Common Action, A Stronger Europe is the name of a white paper released by the EU, and there is controversy now brewing with regard to whether or not its security vision interferes with the responsibility of member states to NATO. The EU is arguing that while NATO exists to defend its member states from external attack, Europeans must be better equipped, trained, and organized to contribute to such collective efforts, as well as to act autonomously if and when necessary. NATO's rebuttal has been a warning that the most important thing is to avoid reduplication. Secretary General Stoltenberg stated further that NATO has well-established structures that are tested and tried over decades, and they are an important part of NATO cooperation. Analysts also note the timing of the move following so close to Britain's Brexit, since the English nation was one of the strongest and most vocal opponents of the proposal. Germany, on the other hand, has been pushing for it, and some suspect that the move might have a lot to do with Berlin seeing open field now that Britain has exited the EU. Another big point of contention for the EU is member states meeting their financial obligations. Under the EU Charter, nations are obligated to earmark 2% of their budgets to defense, but at present only 6 members are said to be fulfilling their responsibilities. This latest proposal by the EU, if embraced, would require significant funding, which analysts say would make it even more unlikely that member nations would have the funds to meet their duties. Israel feels as if it's its duty to protect its citizens has necessitated the recent sealing off of Hebron in the West Bank after an increase in violence there. Recently, a Palestinian woman was killed by Israeli officials after reportedly attempting to stab an Israeli police officer. At least one rabbi has been killed as violence between the two groups has escalated at the checkpoint connecting the West Bank to Jerusalem. This all comes as the quartet published its latest report demanding that Israel refrain from developing settlements and that Palestine put a stop to terrorism. For IPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Kohan Jeff, back to you.
Well, with such continued violence, it's very hard to see peace anywhere in the near future. And we actually have a couple more stories coming up with more violence between the Israelis and Palestinians.
That's right.
Well, continuing on our report, meth has caused a lot of bad scenes within our society. But should someone who's visually under the influence of some type of mind-altering substance deserve to be shot and killed? Well, that's exactly what occurred when police in Burnsville, Minnesota, came upon a knife-wielding man high on meth sitting in his car in a McDonald's parking lot. The officer's body cam footage displayed how the event progressed from trying to initially calm him down. After they realized that he was having some type of fit, the officers then broke the passenger side window.
That's right. After several commands to drop the knife, police attempted to tase the man with, of course, no results. Matcom, the victim, departed rapidly from his car, still waving the knife while running away from officers, but was subsequently shot 15 times. 3 of the 5 officers have been cleared in any wrongdoing in the death of Matcom.
Well, halfway across the world, another knife-wielding man died at Jerusalem's Damascus Gate. Now, at the spot where he drew his last breath, people gathered to say prayers. The violent death was shown from footage taken from ITV News. It shows the man sprinting down the stairway away from officers towards the gate when he was shot repeatedly, even after he hits the ground. Shalom said that the shooting was justified because he tried to attack the officers with a knife and that the officers responded exactly how they were taught. Take a look at what he had to say.
There is no doubt because he tried to attack with a knife the police officers.
Can you describe the officers' reaction to that?
The officers reacted as how we teach them, how we train them, we teach them, how we train them, we teach them, how we train them.
Well, I guess if you continue to teach violence, you're only going to get violence out.
That's absolutely correct. And so far, the last 2 weeks, there has been stabbing incidents in Israel leading to 5 Israeli deaths and the attackers shot on sight. Israeli police said that of the last shooting, the man posed a lethal threat, they said, so he was dealt with lethal force. Palestinian eyewitnesses are enraged and angered at what they say as a completely unjustified use of police force. A local shopkeeper, Mahmoud Castro, said they didn't shoot him to stop him, they shot to kill. They're using M16 rifles, and they shot him with maybe about 100 bullets, more than enough to disable a suspect.
Wow. He also said that this is racism and that this is a country of racism, a terrorist country. People on both sides agree that social media plays a big part in encouraging these type of activities. Palestinians say that the attackers are trying to defend their people's rights. An Israeli government minister, Yuval Steinitz, said that this was about hatred, and that this young man, like many others, was indoctrinated to hate the Jews, to kill the Jews, and to get rid of the Jews.
You know, like the police as well with the citizens, people do what they're taught to do.
Right.
Israeli police have set up more checkpoints to increase security and stop the attacks, but with the building anger in the city, so far those efforts haven't worked.
Another Palestinian was shot dead after trying to attack an Israeli border police officer at the Lions Gate entrance to the Old City. Israeli police spokesman said that the officer noticed the man acting suspiciously and ordered them to approach the suspect so that he could be searched. Well, the suspect attacked an officer with a knife, but he was wearing a protective vest, so the officer wasn't injured. So far, 4 Israelis and 24 Palestinians, including children, have been killed in over 12 days of violence. So you can see it's really starting to heat up again in that area.
That's right. This aggression is fueled by Palestinian anger over increased visits by the Israelis to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. An Israeli official reportedly urged residents to carry weapons for increased protection amidst the violence. Well, the foreign minister has criticized the move, saying that shifting the responsibility of protection from the state to the citizens would lead to chaos.
Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin greeted Finland's president with a handshake and a warning. The warning being, if his Finland joins NATO, Russia will respond. Finland and Sweden have increased cooperation with the Western military alliance since Russia's annexation of Crimea and its backing for separatist rebels in eastern Ukraine. At a press conference, Putin said, "What do you think we'll do if Finland joined NATO? We move our forces back 1,500 kilometers out of the way. Would we keep them there?"
He continued, how they secure and defend the safety of their country is the Finns' choice. And we appreciate, he said, Finland's neutral status. So I'm sure in the back of his mind he's thinking if they do ally with NATO, then they're going to lose that neutral country there.
Well, the Pan-Orthodox Council, currently being held on the Greece island of Crete, has Ukraine awaiting a decision. The unique gathering of Eastern Orthodox patriarchs started on June 19th after a 1,000-year break.
Wow, that's a very long time. Later at one of the synods, patriarch came together to discuss what they called important matters. And I believe that was the patriarch of Bulgaria there. The Pan-Orthodox Council, because certain members of the council will not attend the meeting, citing that there were strong critics of prepared documents.
The Russian Orthodox Church also held a synod on the matter of attending the Pan-Orthodox Council. One of the members spoke saying, When the Bulgarian Orthodox Church said that it will not come, we decided to hold the meeting of the Holy Synod. Now, these days, 2 more churches said they will not come, while another said that it needs to be postponed. With this new situation, we had to convene our own synod to decide if we are going to or not.
And that decision came pretty quickly as he continued. We have decided that if these churches don't want to come, then we can't come to the Pan-Orthodox Council too, because such a meeting wouldn't be a Pan-Orthodox Council and consensus would be impossible. The only solution, he said, is to postpone the council. That is what we are going to suggest, he said, to Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew.
The Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew I, has managed to organize a council of the 14 Orthodox churches. In January of 2016, all agreed to participate, but last-minute misunderstandings have led to cancellations to attend the meeting. Bulgaria, Georgia, Antioch, and Russia were not able to attend. The 10 remaining patriarchs and archbishops from the 10 remaining churches will be meeting in Crete. Now, the purpose of the meeting is to strengthen unity, resolve misunderstandings, and establish a policy with other Christian churches.
The council meeting will run from June 19th through June the 25th, and concerning the matters of the church brought up during the meeting, some suggest not officially finishing until the missing patriarchs accept the agreement. So apparently there are already things that are on the table that are going to be brought up and discussed that the other 4 of the 14 need to be in agreement with.
Interesting that it's been so long, a 1,000-year break, that they decided, this time period right now to get together and have these talks.
Kind of makes you wonder what other type of opposing forces might be kind of scratching at their door.
Absolutely. Well, don't forget to contact the House of Yahweh and request your free Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. To contact them, you can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, and www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website at www.ypnnews.com. For any emails, you can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And for any calls outside the United States, you can call the number on your screen now. And once again, don't forget to check out the Yisrael Says program, the best Bible study tool on the market to answer all your scriptural questions with scriptures.
Well, up next, it's not a pan-Orthodox council, but the person that is ordained to bring forth the council of peace, Yisrael Hawkins. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Ketan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.
At this time, if everyone will please stand, I would like to introduce the greatest teacher in the world, the Great Kohan Yisrayl Abel Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. Okay. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Things are really looking great. The 10 kings, I know if you've read, been keeping up with the newsletters, now that's where I've been bringing them to light more often here lately. And that the newsletters are reaching out big time. I think I have some of that here in this report that was given to me this morning. The new moon. We're going to have the great falafel. So if they didn't report that for the new moon, the House of Yahweh. Keep in mind, the House of Yahweh is the only religious organization that's teaching peace, no just wars, no retaliation, no revenge. And of course, if the people would turn to Yahweh, and they come immediately because of the way the King James Version is translated, and they say, well, you know, Moses killed a bunch of people. No, he killed one person. He killed an Egyptian, and he shouldn't have done that, but he did. And, of course, that hurt the kingdom of Yahweh right there, but it shows you how much he had to overcome before Yahweh actually used him. But anyway, today, now I told you last week that we was reaching, I forgot the number, but we were reaching quite a few countries out of the 196 countries with the newsletters. What? Okay. 147, is that what you said? 147? 144. Okay. Should remember that, 144. This, since January, they sent me this report since January. It says this is a report that shows since January of this year, we have received hits to our website from 187 countries, 187 out of a total of 196. That leaves 9. I looked up the word 9 quickly a while ago. That means something lost. Some that haven't been found yet. A thing which has been lost. Well, of course, the whole thing was lost when, before the House of Yahweh started reaching them, and now they're gathering together in abundance to hear the program. This week, if I find one that's complete that I can read, I did send a newsletter out saying what it means to have eternal life and how to obtain it. The nation of Israel, of course, was led out of the Coptic Catholic religion, and they were trained for 40 years in peace. They were trained 40 years in the wilderness, and of course the kingdom of Yahweh was assuring them that they would have peace if they would just train, and there'd be a kingdom of priests that would bring peace, not war, but peace. But they turned to fighting, and of course they rejected Yahweh, and they wanted a king to fight their battles just like all other nations, and that's when they became like all other nations. And today is what we have today in this generation. I don't want to get myself lost here. I've got some, here it is. Okay. The powerful speech of Pope Francis, it condemns the EU leaders' efforts to shut out refugees. Of course, they were being told to shut out the refugees at that time, being told that they, until Francis gave his speech, and they did a poor job, and he was really condemning them for it. In the days of Constantine, when he selected two gods, he was grabbing at straws like they're grabbing at straws today. And of course the Pope, he has his speeches written out for him, and he doesn't go off on his own in these speeches. He says these have been well thought out, they've been well written out, A lot of psychology here is used, and that I keep bringing to you from time to time to show you what they're leading up to and why they said such a thing. This article here says, "Forgive Pope Francis for his sins against reason." Pope Francis has a problem. He believes he heads a religious organization so inept and impotent it cannot even marry its own members reliably. Well, you know, he said all marriages in the Catholic Church was null. This week, he says none of them are valid. And Pope Francis doesn't read the scriptures. He doesn't read the Book of Yahweh, but he's hearing things that's brought out from the House of Yahweh. And the Vatican is hearing this, and they're trying to attack the House of Yahweh and make out like that they are following the Holy Scriptures. The 10 kings that you just saw, I would that you'd catch up on what I've already said about those, and then I'll be bringing much more out in the coming weeks, but you're going to see them. They make war against the Lamb. Revelation 17, these make war against the Lamb. Well, they're making war against the Lamb right now, and the Pope is going to give them more authority. That is, the Vatican is going to give them more authority to come against the House of Yahweh. But as Yeshua said, the gates of hell are not going to prevail against his house this time. There's a lot of reason behind this, and of course it takes books to explain it. But if you can imagine, when they took the children of Israel out of Egypt, out of the Coptic Catholic religion, out of the house of bondage. Now, when Yeshua said this to the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians, he said, if you would follow me, I'll make you free indeed. And of course, they said, what do you mean make us free? We're the children of Abraham. We've never been in bondage. Well, see, the way the scriptures are written, you would think that they were southern slaves, like you saw or read about the southern slaves in Mississippi and in the southern states, and the shows that was put out about those slaves. It wasn't quite that way. They played it up to look bad because they didn't want slavery the way they had it in the South, and they didn't want it the way they had it throughout the world ever again, because slaves don't pay taxes. And this was the reason the slaves were taken and freed. They never were set free, but they changed the laws as to how they're held in bondage. The whole world in the United States today is held in bondage. I just was handed an article showing the national debt. The national debt jumped by nearly 100 billion in one day to record high. That's the national debt. Now, what this does, there's an old Western song that says, I owe my soul to the country store. Well, this is the way you're held in bondage with these debts, the deceitfulness of riches. We've had people leave the house of Yahweh and go out into the world to make debts. Make more money where they can go in debt. And of course, we've had a lot of people that have saw their mistake and tried to, get back in, but they couldn't. They didn't know what to do about their debts. But this is the bondage. This is one kind of bondage. But the kind of bondage that the Savior was speaking of wasn't what we saw in the South, and it wasn't even this right here, which holds people in slavery because it keeps them working to pay their debts. But what he was talking about was sin, and he said, he who practices sin is a servant of sin. He's a slave to sin. Well, of course, this is the bondage that Yahshua was trying to explain to them. When you sin, then you become a slave to that sin because, now listen closely, it all adds up. It's piece by piece by piece. You commit a sin, you commit with it death. Dying, you will die. Well, then you have to start working when you find out your body's breaking down. Well, the first thing you think about is going to the doctor, which is, that doubles your chances of getting worse right there. Sometimes it triples it. Sometimes it's 100% that you're going to die if you go to the doctor because his business is filled with diseases. The hospitals are filled with the same. And of course, we've had people here that went to the doctors, and then slowly but surely, actual fact, it didn't take 2 months, a few months for them to die. We buried them because of something they got in the hospital. I know you're familiar with these people, and there's no bringing them back and letting them start over again and not go to the doctor, not get the disease. But once you commit sin, every sin you commit, no matter how young you are or how old you are, you commit sin, you commit a disease. You may not recognize it right now, but you will later. And once you recognize it, then you have to start. The normal routine is you go to the doctor you have to pay him. He writes you a prescription. If you get it every month, you pay him every month for that prescription because he gets a cut of it. Then he sends you to the hospital. The hospital gives you a few more of these bacteria while you're there and then treats you. Here's another bill you have to pay. So you owe your soul to the company stole. and Yahshua said if you practice sin, then you're a slave to that sin until you die. And then, of course, death sets you free from that right there. Later, if you haven't been called, you'll get a chance, if you haven't been called, to straighten up your life and maybe see the seriousness of sin the next time. But Pope Francis, he's seeing their mistakes, which is many mistakes. And they're asking him actually to step down. That is, the people, his subjects. This is what Constantine faced when he was in office. And he did some pretty drastic things. People thought he was crazy. They said, he was an idiot. But he did some drastic things in trying to solve these problems. Well, we're facing the biggest problems today. We're facing them ourselves. NATO was created, of course, by the Pope. It's a large organization that is very active in Iraq today. And you see the children in Iraq and how they're suffering. You see the deaths there from the beginning there in Afghanistan. And of course, this is spreading. But NATO was actually organized to fight Russia. It was in 1949, I do believe, I'm going by guess, but 1949 when they were put together, and it was meant as it's being used today. It's also being used today. The things that the United States is doing in surrounding Russia, and the reason you saw the news clipping last week where Putin was talking about them surrounding him with missile defense stations, that's NATO doing this. It's not the United States. The United States is furnishing money and ships, but it's NATO that's pulling the strings. the quartet was formed as a trying to find a quick fix to get the Vatican's power back over a land that was taken from them. And Micaiah shows this prophecy saying, because of you. Because of you, well, if he was speaking today, he'd say, because of you who sit on 7 hills. Because this was the same organization following the same serpent, a representative of the same serpent, but they're the children that Isaiah 14 speaks of. They are the children they're the root of this first serpent that created the wars with using the first pope, who was Cain, the first pope Cain, who organized just wars in order to kill his brother, but to fight off righteousness. It wasn't Cain who actually killed Abel, but it was the organization and Cain's soldiers. Cain was a priest. He was like the Pope today. He gave the orders, he pulled the strings that brought about the things that his agency, that was the Catholic Church, yes, the Catholic Church, the God worshippers. This was an organization that worshiped gods. And when the serpent said to Eve, "You'll be like the gods." Well, at that time, this agency, listen to me now, at that time, this agency that sits on 7 hills today, that's worshiping the gods, one of them saying, rape children, gives you permission to rape children. This was the organization that made up the agency, the Catholic Church, who Cain served as a pope, as the first pope. And of course, the gods say, by this, holding up the sword, upside down sword, by this you will conquer. This is the way you do your conquering. That was shown to Constantine, but it was shown to Cain first. And that's the reason that he killed Abel. Not directly, but indirectly. After they were spread abroad, then he brought death, wars to Abel, and however many that were killed in that time period. We'll get into that deeper. But now the Pope is saying that the people are not, they can't be held on as smart enough, intelligent enough to choose a mate. Now, not too long ago, if you remember, I attacked some work that the Vatican put out about marriages, and of course this was because of what they're bringing out about men marrying men. Of course the breeding that has taken place. Here's some more. If you practice sin, you're the servant of sin. You become the servant of sin. Well, of course, sodomy, it creates all these diseases. It brings forth premature births by the millions. It brings forth defects, birth defects, but it confuses the mind also. So this is what I brought forth in the sermons, if you remember, and I brought this out rather clearly from a letter that they had written and had the Pope read, and I brought it out that they didn't follow the Scriptures, and I showed the Scriptures and how that you make vows, they're forever, and this is what was taught throughout the Holy Scriptures by the Savior too, and of course the marriage and divorce that he is now getting on is a result of making war against the Lamb. The Lamb is bringing out through he's high priest over the house of Yahweh, so he, working with you at this time, the house of Yahweh, is bringing out these truths. I think the biggest majority of the Vatican know who they're facing in the house of Yahweh today, and they know the prophecies. And of course, Yahshua says they're going to make war against the Lamb. That's Revelation 17, about verse 9, I think, or somewhere along in there, 16 maybe. But they'll make war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome, meaning the house of Yahweh. Yahshua, our high priest, sits in heaven at this time. So, but we, the house of Yahweh, that's his house, and he says that they won't prevail. They won't prevail over you. They'll try to scare you. They'll try to scare you into leaving. And if you're questioned out on the job and you deny the house of Yahweh, you better remember what Yahshua said, because they are going to question you. If you're out in the world where you can be questioned, they will question you. And if you deny Yahshua, then, you'll be denied before his Father also. Keep that in mind. You're going to face this situation. The things that you're seeing right now is very real. It's prophesied back in 96 AY. YA. After Yahshua, AY, 96. They were prophesied at that time. This was a prophecy that was given to Yahshua by Yahweh. And then Yahshua then had Yochanan, who was in prison now by this Roman power. He was in prison and actually wrote this down. Then Yahweh had all of this gathered up, every bit of this gathered up, and put in one book for us. That's where we have the advantage over what Moshe had when he brought 3 million people out of Egypt who were Coptic Catholics. That's what they were. They're the same thing that sits on the 7 hills of Rome. Coptics just simply means Egypt or Egyptian. These are not Coptic in Egypt, in Rome, they're Roman Catholic. Catholic means unrestricted by any law of Yahweh. That's what it means. No restrictions. It means universal. It means they worship all the gods. No restrictions on any of them. They found their evil that they like and they want to obey it. But they're seeing where they're getting into trouble because people like Yochanan, when he came to pave the way for Yahshua, and he told Philip, it's not right for you to have your brother's wife. Well, somehow or another now, he had to know that. Well, he heard it from the prophets. At that time, we had the books of the prophets, or the Book of Yahweh, which was the prophets up until Malachi, which was about 400 years before Yahshua. Malachi. And we had it up until we had the books. They had the books of that period. So Moshe, he actually wrote part of these books, part of them. Abel wrote the biggest part of the law himself and had it available, and he and the priest after him, one after another, trained by Abel. Noah was the one just before the flood that was trained by Abel. And of course, Noah was a righteous man. The scriptures testifies to that. So, the books of the law that they had, and they remembered this and said, we've got to live by this law if you want salvation. So Yochanan, in the day before Yahshua, he came saying, this is not right what you're doing. You're sitting in a high office here. You're teaching the people. He didn't just say it's not right to have your brother's wife. This man was preaching sermons about this king. And of course, these sermons were getting back to the king. So he had Yochanan arrested and cut off his head. What did Cain do? He had Abel arrested. How he was killed, I don't know, but he had him arrested and killed. It's just following the same pattern. Know them by their fruits, as our deacon brought out today. White Buffalo brought out today. Know them by their fruits. Well, these are their fruits. The fruits that Cain was bringing was totally unacceptable to Yahweh. And that's what Yahweh said. That if you do righteousness, then your fruits will be acceptable. If you don't do righteousness, that means you're practicing sin. Sin is not acceptable in the kingdom of Yahweh. And you really better get that straight and start going to extremes to get rid of every sin. Well, he says, while participating in a conference for the Diocese of Rome last week, Pope Francis unburdened himself of the opinion that the sacrament of marriage within the Catholic Church is now defective. It's now defective. Now, there's two things he's trying to persuade the people right now. He's trying to persuade them that you've got to change the law as you go to fit the conditions of today's activities and today's lifestyles. Instead of changing the ways of the people to fit righteousness, see, that would be restricting you from your rights. So instead of changing the people like the disciples, the prophets, and Yahshua did, they want to change the law to where they can say, well, now you're obeying the law. We'll make this lawful, like the Supreme Court said of men marrying men, we'll make this lawful. See? Well, the Vatican is the one that brought that about. The Vatican is the leader of the kings of the earth today. And that's a fact. She's the leader of the kings of the earth. And when she brought this law through, then there was many, many objections rose up within the Catholic Church itself. And people went to leave in the Catholic Church. Before that, they were leaving for other reasons, but a bunch of people started leaving because of the openness of the practice of sodomy. The poor people, the children that are born in this world out there, I know that many of you were protected from this, so as I was. But the children that are born in the world, they don't even begin to find out what they are, whether they're male or female or half or whatever it might be. You're not lost, you know. And Yahweh talks about you in Isaiah and says, no, you're not lost. If you keep my Sabbaths and do my works, yes, he said, I'll give you a name equal to sons and daughters if you will do it. But it's something you've got to overcome, just like Cain. You've got to overcome sin. And Yekishka says, if you see the sins of your parents, if a son is born, he sees the sins of the parents and says, I don't want anything to do with that, I want to be righteous, he said, you will live. And of course, you will be changed and given the body that you're supposed to be given to begin with, without going to the doctors and getting the doctors to cut on you. Well, he says that the marriages are defective in the Catholic Church because, now get this, because the West is afflicted with a culture of provisional. The Pope said that the great majority of our sacramental marriages are null. in Catholic speech, null means the marriage never happened. So you people that got married in the Catholic Church, now they go on here with some more psychology to make out like that as the marriages evolved this way, they've got to be changed now to this way, and after a while they will evolve to something that we can all live with, all agree with. And this comes out in the next part of this article. He says, after all, we were married by tribalism. We were married by tribalism at one time. And I think when he speaks of that, he is speaking of the 12 tribes of Israel when they were following the laws of Yahweh. Tribes, tribalism. Most people would think of it as dark Africa. That's what they paint in the shows, you know, where you have a witch doctor, a so-called witch doctor, and that's all a lie too. The witch doctors were merely herbalists, but they painted them up to look what they wanted to get them out of the way because they found a lot of money in medicine. This next article kind of paints the picture here of the attitude of the people and says, enough is enough. Pope Francis should resign. and they're showing the big mistakes that he's made and how it's affecting the Catholic Church and causing the people to fall away. This one, of course, is the death that comes to our children when we practice sin. Dying you will die. Then Yahweh talks about your children and how they're going to suffer to the third and fourth generation, along with the diseases that they themselves develop. Catholic priest in Montreal banned from being alone with children. They're banned in Montreal, banned for being alone with children. So the people are rising up against the Vatican today, as they did in the days of Constantine. Constantine, he didn't read the Holy Scriptures. He read psychology. He read business management. The Greeks had schools that were famous for business and psychology, how to be doctors, but how to be a doctor of psychology, you know, and those two things, they were big time schools that you could get in where you could actually train to be a priest in the Catholic Church, hold a high position in the municipal systems throughout the world, and so forth. Well, the Surgeon General, now he says gun violence is a public health threat, and they're finally seeing now that this is a sickness. But here again now, when I read this article, you notice that they don't know what to do. The greatest public health crisis, according to the Surgeon General, isn't cancer or heart disease. It's isolation, and the effects of being socially disconnected. Now, he's right in some of this, and he's wrong, but what he's trying to do is this writer that wrote this article, he's writing for the Vatican because they intend to try to bring about. They're not going to get it done this time, but they're going to try to bring about a one-world religion. That's like trying to move 3 million people back to some country that they came from. And as every politician except Donald Trump knows, it's impossible. But this right here is the same thing. The Attorney General is saying isolation and disconnection. Isolation and disconnection. Now, what he means, what he wants you to believe, and I hope the world is listening to us big time, because this is part of this one world religion. What they're trying to make out like is that if you're disconnected from the Catholic Church, you're going to go buy a gun from a gun shop and start shooting people. If you're not Christian, oh no, those people were Christian, weren't they? Well, you see the mess they're in. The woman that just killed her 2 children, I don't know if we had that today, killed her 2 children, then the police killed her. So we'll never get to the bottom of this through her to find out what clicked up here to make that take place. But that just took place yesterday, I believe, or day before. She was disconnected from the Catholic Church. That's what they want you to believe. The Catholic Church, the people have killed more people than any religion on the face of the earth. And this is a fact of history. You don't have to take my word for it. Look up the history of the Bible and just trying to wipe out the Bible to keep it from being printed. You can't imagine, when I grew up in Oklahoma, the Bible was spoken of with high reverence. You know, you're supposed to follow the laws in the Bible. And this was what was taught throughout the people that I knew. And half the time when I'd be in people's houses, you know, I would hear them quoting Scripture. But that was back 50 years ago, no, 70, 80 years ago, somewhere along in there. And times have changed. Since Hollywood, the Bible was put on a shelf somewhere to gather dust and never used anymore after that. The preachers finally gave in to what was being taught on television and joined it. They joined with Hollywood, and they went to tell them, well, you know, this is normal now. So normal is acceptable. Whatever the majority chooses is acceptable. And the colleges and local schools, they started teaching conform. I remember a survey put out in college when I was in college, and the most thing that people wanted to do, the uppermost thing the children asked for was just to be able to conform so they would be accepted by the society. And I thought, well, you know, why wouldn't you want to? And I brought this out in a sermon in college. I don't know if it's liked or disliked now, but I brought it out that we should conform to the Scriptures instead of the desires or lust of men. And I know the people act like they liked it at the time, but I don't think they changed any after that. But anyway, to be disconnected from the headquarters, which this is what they want now, is the Vatican being in charge, and they're pushing more and more for that. And if you'll watch the news, you will see hints of it being broadcast here and there for a one-world religion and a one-world government with a central command station, which they want that to be the Vatican or something that the Vatican controls. They'll probably pick something down in Kalamazoo somewhere and say it's coming from there, and so the Pope won't have to say, or the Vatican won't have to say or show that they're in charge. It's like saying Rome was established by 2 brothers that got kicked out of heaven, and a she-wolf raised them, and then one killed the other one. You know, well, mythology, it does refer to things, certain things, but you'd never figure it out. Rome actually means mighty warrior. That should tell you something. Vatican means serpent, or the divining serpent. That should tell you that the mighty warrior is owned by the divining serpent, whose leader is the real serpent, of course. And he's following, the Vatican is following their way. But now listen to this closely. we have to ask ourselves, what caused people to have so much anger? I thought that was great, because Yahweh actually asked Cain that same question in Genesis 4, verses 6 through 8. He said, why are you so angry? Cain, why are you so angry? Wake up. What's making you angry? Trying to get them to wake up. Well, they're asking the same question here. Anger, much anger in themselves, that they visited upon other people in the form of violence. When we look at this, we realize we have a great degree of isolation and confusion. No, not confusion. He uses the word frustration. In our country, we have a great deal of isolation and frustration in our country. Well, what's causing the frustration? Yahweh answered that. What's causing the anger? He answered that. It's sin that's causing it. You can't live in peace and practice sin. You create hostility around other people when you practice sin with other people. You create this in them. Their governments, Yahweh tells them, their laws are unjust. Their governments are strictly force, not teaching, as Yahweh says. Teach up a child. Teach diligently your children, he said. Teach it diligently to your children. Train up a child in the way he should go. Well, of course, the Catholic Church, they want you to think, well, the way he should go is no restrictions. That's what Catholic means. Universal, no restrictions. That takes away, they say, that takes away the people's rights. When you restrict them with the law that says, don't commit fornication, you stop your daughters and your sons from committing fornication. They're saying that restricts you from them, from their rights. Whereas it doesn't restrict them from the rights to get into the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't restrict them from the right to have eternal life. But yes, if you want in the kingdom of heaven, you cannot practice fornication. Fornication brings forth sickness, disease, frustration, isolation, anger, wars, and fighting. That's what fornication brings. Confusion, as Leviticus 18 said. So does adultery, sodomy, bestiality. All of those things bring forth. Yes, they tell you, they don't restrict you. Yahweh says you've got to choose it yourself. The laws of Yahweh don't force. They don't force you to keep those laws. Yahweh says the ones that's going to be chosen for his kingdom are the ones that's going to choose righteousness. They're going to choose not to commit fornication. They're going to choose not to steal. Let him who stole steal no more. That's repentance, as Yahshua showed and the disciples showed. Repent of this and start practicing the laws of Yahweh. And then you will be acceptable to live forever. And you will help others around you live forever. It's that simple. The Surgeon General, Dr. Vervick Murphy, has called gun violence in the United States a public health issue. Well, it is a public health issue, but the creation, I got right behind this an article here showing that they refuse to serve pork. They're making it a law that they couldn't force the children in the schools to eat pork. They would not have it on the menus anymore. and of course, a lot of people rose up against it, but there was a lot of people that was for it, and there was enough people that was for it that the judge thought it worthwhile to actually get their votes and make it a law not to go. Of course, he probably knows it won't stand, but because the pork industry is like the pharmacy, it brings in a lot of money. But anyway, they are beginning to turn to the Holy Scripture. Now, it could be because of the radio programs, it could be because of the newsletters or the prophetic word letter or so forth, or the prophetic word. We bring it out in all of it. Praise Yahweh. And they get to looking in their Bibles and they say, hey, this does say don't eat pork. It says it's unclean. It says it causes confusion to the mind. But look, it says the same thing about sodomy. Did you know that? How come the Catholic Church is practicing sodomy? Well, they've already barred the priest from being alone with a child. Why do they keep going to that place anyway? I heard that the ice was melting on the North Pole, and they said it could be all gone by this year. Now, if it is, that'd be the perfect way to bring your animals and everything right across from the North Pole. Everybody that's like my ancestors years ago, bring them right across from the North Pole right down to the House of Yahweh in Texas. I'm just putting a possibility out there for you. I'm not telling you to do it. I mean, it's faster by train or plane, but that is a way that some of the people got to America, what we call America today. They got here before 1492, when Columbus supposedly discovered it. They was here waiting for him to come and kill them. Another Catholic, another just war. Yes, Columbus was a Catholic, and that's the reason he took an army and went to slaughtering people who would not turn to Catholicism. Well, that's some of the fights and some of the just wars are still going on. It's causing trouble. It's big time trouble. They don't know how to solve their problems. They know how to solve their problems, but they don't want that way. They want to find a way to solve their problems and still practice fulfilling their lust, and it just doesn't work. The lust, fulfilling the lust, the illegal lust, it builds up the death inside of you that goes to your brain, that starts knocking off the cells of righteousness that would gear you to righteousness, and then after a while this darkness sets in, and as Yahweh showed you through the great prophet Jeremiah, and the priest that was once able to see and teach righteousness, teach sensibleness to the people, was no longer able to do it. And then before you know it, there's even taken the name Yahweh out of the Holy Scriptures and replacing it with the title of dead rabbis. That really made a lot of sense, didn't it? Just take the name Yahweh and Yahshua totally out of the Scriptures and replace it with dead rabbis, the title of a dead rabbi. Well, that's what Constantine did. Constantine had a world of troubles. It would take a big book, to explain all of them, but he had a world of troubles, and he was desperate to try to find an answer for the Vatican. but he did the best he could. It caused all kinds of problems. It caused the world to get much worse in his day and his regime. But the Vatican was the one that was trying to find the answer, and they were just giving him the things to do that they had decided might help. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the next leader. I love you!